A recent radio interview with Bengie Molina speculates on the major league managerial future of his brother Yadi. Could we see Yadier Molina as a big league manager someday in St. Louis or perhaps elsewhere? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you on Thursday, December 5th, 2024. Cardinals baseball talk here on YouTube, as well as b-schaeff Daily on Spotify. Make sure to follow the podcast there and subscribe on YouTube. Not a lot new going on just yet as far as potential trades for the Cardinals to make this winter. We did get an update on the Cardinals hiring a couple more directors to their organizational staff as Larry Day and Carl Cohan joined the organization as the directors of player development and performance, respectively. Cohan comes from the Dodgers organization, was a minor league strength and conditioning coordinator for them in recent years, previous experience with the Giants as a big league strength and conditioning coach, and as well as through the minors, he's been on the West Coast for a good long time as part of those organizations. And Larry Day is the gentleman's name who will take over as the director of player development, comes over from the Guardians, had worked with Rob Cerfolio over there. These individuals, as well as the Matt Pierpont addition for the role of director of pitching, which we talked about in a previous podcast a couple days ago, those were all officially announced by the Cardinals, and figured that all three of those positions would report to Cerfolio, who again was hired in a new role, right, replacing Gary LaRocque, but basically establishing a assistant general manager position and naming him in charge of player performance and player development, kind of combining those two departments together in a reworked role. And Cerfolio expected to be one of the higher-ups, obviously, in the Cardinals front office as they continue to fill out their staff. And this was the move that was expected. We heard when the Cardinals hired Rob Cerfolio from Cleveland a number of weeks ago that it would be his next move to hire then a director of player development and performance. Those two things have happened, so the Cardinals continuing to beef up their staff. But I want to talk about another staff figure, I suppose, one that we thought was going to be involved with the Cardinals last year on staff, and it did not end up materializing, with Yadier Molina joining in any real capacity to report to the Cardinals and perform as part of their coaching staff. It didn't end up happening. I don't know if officially he's on the books or not, because Mozeliak announced that it was going to happen and that he was going to be at spring training. And of course, we remember that just never came to fruition. But an interesting recent interview on the radio with Bengie Molina on the morning after on 101 ESPN, speculating a little bit and talking about Yadier Molina's potential big league managerial future. Obviously a topic of interest to Cardinals fans. A lot of folks say, I would love Yadi to be the manager of the Cardinals someday. Other people say, I'm not so sure, doesn't have any experience. Well, we'll talk about what Bengie, his brother, had to say about that. Of course, Bengie Molina, the Spanish radio broadcast for the Cardinals, does that with Polo Asensio. Those guys do a great job. And Bengie was there at 101 promoting a toy drive that he's got coming up that he's involved with, and shedding some interesting light on his thoughts when it comes to Yadi's big league managerial future. We'll talk about it, and we'll let you hear from Bengie with that clip from the morning after coming up on today's episode of b-schaeff Daily. But wanted to let everybody know that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Smith Agri-Service, a family-owned independent retailer providing farmers in Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa with competitive pricing on Corteva, BASF, generic brand crop protection products, and Brevant corn and soybean seed. Get in touch with Smith Agri-Service by scanning the QR code there on your screen or text 202-988-1106, or you can email smithag@irtc.net. Thank you again to Smith Agri-Service for their partnership on today's episode. So let's talk about it. Let's get it right off the top and have you hear from Bengie Molina, who, again, he was on the morning after show with Tim McKernan, Doug Vaughn, Martin Kilcoyne, Jackson Burkett on 101 ESPN, their morning show. And he had this to say as the guys were talking about Yadier Molina potentially wanting to be a manager in the big leagues. Would he want to manage with the Cardinals, or, maybe could he be open to opportunities elsewhere despite spending his entire big league playing career in St. Louis? If the Cardinals have a manager, and they currently do, Ollie Marmol is under contract, could Yadi decide he would rather not wait around and go somewhere else? This was the clip from the morning after. We'll play it here.
He doesn't want to go anywhere else. I'll tell you that right now. But he's not shutting the doors either. Like, if St. Louis doesn't offer him a job, like managing, for whatever reason, doesn't offer, he's not closing the doors on any team. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like, he would love to stay here. He would love to come here and manage. But if it doesn't happen, hey, somebody else will give him a job.
So I'm going to stop the clip there for a moment and kind of break down a little bit of what Bengie is talking about. So his preference, again, we have to keep the context in mind. This isn't Yadier Molina doing an interview, but it's his brother Bengie, and so a lot of people are obviously going to take what Bengie has to say and give it considerable merit, considering that's his brother he's talking about. So you have to believe, opinions that would be expressed by Bengie, while they're just Bengie's opinion, and he's going to share a little bit more about that in a clip we'll play coming up, because I thought Martin Kilcoyne asked him a great question. We'll play that here. But just to give the context, like, it's not actually Yadi delivering the interview, but basically saying, yeah, he's not going to close the door to go somewhere else because Yadi wants to manage someday. I think that we've sort of known that that's the case, but it's just been a little bit of a kind of an awkward dance. Doesn't it feel like that last couple of years when it comes to, okay, Yadi's going to come back and be part of the coaching staff. Is that going to look like a role in the dugout? Is he going to be the bench coach? Is he going to, that speculation was going on around this time last year, it feels like. And then it didn't end up materializing, but at last winter warm-up, that means January or so, I can remember John Mozeliak being on the stage there at winter warm-up and being asked the question and saying, yes, everybody wants to know, what's going on with Yadi. Well, I can tell you he is going to be back. He's going to be part of the coaching staff. What that looks like, they didn't know at the time, and ultimately said, okay, not going to be a full-time role, which was sort of the realization but in the conversations that went on, I guess, that Yadi wasn't necessarily looking for a full-time coaching role right away. He had just recently retired, and so that's fine. The Cardinals said you can come back in whatever capacity you want to, and it seemed for a while that was going to look like some appearances and participation from Yadi at spring training, and then maybe at his leisure throughout the season would maybe as a roving instructor or could spend some time with the catchers at the various levels of the minors. Like, the Cardinals were really kind of open and willing to allow Yadi to sort of do what he wanted, do as much or as little as he wanted, and cater that toward his schedule and things that he's got going on. And Bengie talked in the interview on 101 too about Yadi having coaching with family. He's got his nephew and he's got his kids, and just maybe it not being the exact right time, right in this moment, for him to want to have that managerial job. And maybe a couple of years down the road, as kids get a little further along and the family situation is such that he's going to be willing or looking to devote more time toward other endeavors, that could maybe be a fit for Yadi to make that return. But it was a great question that was asked, and I'll play the clip here, continuing from the morning after on 101 ESPN. Martin Kilcoyne asking, okay, we're talking about managing. Yeah, he wants to manage. He wants to manage. What would it look like as far as just a coaching role, though? Because that was something that Yadi, again, seemingly agreed to do last year. We never really heard from Yadi on that publicly. We heard from John Mozeliak saying it was going to happen. And then, of course, we get spring and he's not there. And then the whole season happens and he's not there. So that one kind of ends up being a real head scratcher. But it's not that confusing because, again, from where I sit, I was not surprised to not see Yadi. I was more surprised to hear initially that he was willing to come back in a capacity that wasn't a significant one, right? But it would make sense, too, if the Cardinals say, that's fine, we don't have a manager job to offer you, you don't want to be the bench coach because that's very time-consuming and maybe not particularly appealing, kind of like when Matt Holliday said he would do it and then said, oh, wait a minute, I don't need to do this. Not to say that it's a role that would be beneath certain players, former players of certain stature, but yeah, I mean, the guys have money. They have all they could want for, and as much as you might want the cachet of being a big league manager and being able to step right into that seat, to think that you would grind as a bench coach maybe was not something I thought made sense for Holliday, and clearly he didn't think it made sense for him either. Same thing for Yadier Molina. Like, I would have been surprised if he had accepted a bench coach position, and lo and behold, you have Daniel Descalso take that role. And Daniel Descalso was a quality, longtime big leaguer. He's not a Hall of Famer. He's not Yadier Molina in terms of his stature, right? So if Daniel Descalso wants that future in coaching or potentially to become a manager, kind of like Skip Schumacher did, right? Bench coach with the Cardinals, goes on to be a manager with the Marlins, and then we'll see where Skip ends up as he took on that job with the Rangers, kind of maybe the manager in waiting, it feels like, for Bruce Bochy there in Texas. But it's kind of the path for a lot of those guys, whereas maybe Yadi is a player who had a caliber of career that puts him in a different boat. That's sort of the thought process. At least it seems to be the thought process based on what we've seen as far as tea leaves for Yadier Molina so far. And then this question from Martin Kilcoyne, again, context, it's just going to be Bengie Molina expressing his opinion on the topic, but it feels like it probably falls in line seemingly with the way that Yadi might think about things. But Martin asks, would Yadi want to be a coach? Not just, manager role, but would he be willing to be a coach first, get some experience, and then potentially step into a managerial job thereafter? Here was that exchange.
Would he come here and coach if he's on the staff? Would he be open to coaching first?
I don't think Yadi is, in my opinion, I don't think Yadi is a coach level type thing. I think Yadi is a manager wherever he goes.
So again, this is not Yadier Molina saying it, that I don't think I'm too good for it. I had too good of a career. I was too high profile of a player. I don't need to be a coach first. I have the acumen. Everybody knows my baseball acumen. I could step right in and be a manager. That's not Yadi saying it. It's his brother saying, in his opinion, Yadi's a manager. When he's ready to jump back in there, he's a manager. He doesn't have to do the serve in a coaching role to get some experience. He knows the game well enough. He could step right in and be an effective big league manager right away. And we've seen that before. Guys with limited to no coaching experience stepping right in and being big league managers. Sometimes it goes great. Sometimes it doesn't. But even like a Stephen Vogt, a guy who was the AL manager of the year this year with Cleveland, in 2023, the year after he retired, he was at least a coach. He coached I think he coached catchers and quality control for the Seattle Mariners. That was Stephen Vogt's role in 2023. And then after just 1 year of that, was ready to take on a managerial job in Cleveland, got the gig, did really well, won the division, manager of the year in the American League. Like, that is absolutely possible. And I think Yadier Molina, certainly on a level of baseball acumen and all those things, to be able to potentially pull something like that off. I am not necessarily one who says Yadier Molina would have to be a coach first for me to believe that he could be an effective big league manager. I don't think that would necessarily be the case. And again, when you compare Stephen Vogt with Yadier Molina, yes, two former catchers. One should end up in the Hall of Fame. The other one will not. And so is that distinction such that we, or not really we as the public, but a major league team, or specifically the Cardinals here, since the whole premise here is Bengie saying, yeah, Yadi would like to be able to do what he does with the Cardinals. And if they don't offer him a managerial job for whatever reason, and I think that's Bengie being respectful of the fact that there's currently a guy that's the manager, and he's a young upstart manager and could end up being the manager here for a very long time. So like that could fall among the reasons. There may not be another hiring that takes place. And if there's not, then okay, that would be one reason that the Cardinals would not hire Yadi. But it kind of feels as though Yadi, when he gets that shot, wants to be a manager, doesn't really want to be a full-time coach prior to that. That's Bengie Molina talking. Again, not Yadi talking, but based on the actions last year where Yadi was supposedly going to be a Cardinals coach and then it didn't happen, and it was an arrangement that would have been very favorable and respectful of Yadi's time commitments and his scheduling. Mosaic basically was candid and said, hey, he can do as much or as little as he wants. We just would love to have him around. If he wants to be around, that works for us. Doesn't need to be a full-time bench coach to be part of the Cardinal organization. That was the way that the Cardinals viewed it. I think a very reasonable way to view things, right? That's kind of been the way that Ozzie Smith has been deployed by the Cardinals over the years. He's often at spring training, but he's not necessarily required to do. He's Ozzie Smith, for goodness sake. Like the Cardinals are like, yeah, we'd like to have you around if you want to be around. So given that it was that wide open for Yadi, but it wasn't a priority for him to become a coach or an advisor in any capacity last year, I would say that tracks with Bengie Molina saying, in my opinion, Yadi's not a coach, he's a manager. All right, whether you agree or disagree with that as a Cardinal fan or as a baseball fan in general, I do think it's the way that Yadi probably views things, is that, okay, I'm waiting around here. Cardinals have a manager. They're going to fire that manager at some point. There was some talk. Maybe if they did, maybe if they were hiring, that would coincide with my willingness to jump in and be the guy. But that's very tenuous ground. Right? Because, I do still maintain that the Cardinals like Ollie Marmol and are glad to have Ollie Marmol as their manager. And also there is that aspect of, okay, we've kind of gone down this road before when it comes to like the Matt Holliday deal, where we thought we had our bench coach, just speaking from the organizational perspective, thought we had our bench coach, and then we got to mid-January and suddenly we didn't have a bench coach, and that's kind of a bad spot to be in as an organization. We had to scramble and hire one at the last minute. you would hate to a managerial hiring. Let's say there is a world in which the Cardinals move on from Ollie Marmol at some point. Doesn't have to be this year. Doesn't have to be next year, 5 years from now, whatever it is. Let's say that it eventually is something that takes place for whatever reason, and the Cardinals are making the decision of, what should we do? Who should we hire to be our next manager? And there's Yadier Molina sitting there, wants to be a manager. If he hasn't done anything or taken any steps toward getting back involved in that capacity yet, he's still there and available. You could hire him, but do you run the risk of potentially going, hey, this guy doesn't have the experience of doing it from that side of the fence, obviously knows the commitment necessary to be a great player, did it for a long, long time, but without having that experience from the coaching side and understanding the demands of what that role looks like, it's not to say that Yadi doesn't have an idea of what that would look like, but he's not, given that he's not done it, would there be some risk for the Cardinals saying we're going to plant our flag on this guy, but knowing that there was a question previously of, how much does he really want to do this? Is it only about getting the title of manager? And that's the main motivator. That's obviously a high profile position. And so if you're Yadier Molina, you are a high profile player. You don't want to settle for anything less than the high profile role. Okay, understandable. But I hate to even question the commitment of Yadier Molina. It's not what I intend to be doing here, but it's just one of those things where the Cardinals would have to be darn sure that, okay, hey, when 2024 happened and we were offering you to get involved and you didn't want to, I would think it would be an interview question, right? Of are you in this? Because we know that you've got all the money and we know that you've got a lot of other endeavors going on outside of baseball at this point in your life. Nobody would blame you for it if you didn't want to get back into the daily grind of it. This daily grind is not lesser than when you were a player. It is probably from a physical perspective, but the hours that are poured into it, it's not that it's lesser. Are you ready to embark upon that journey? I think that would be my question if I'm the Cardinals, understanding that there was the opportunity to do very, very little and basically name your schedule in 2024. Didn't show up, didn't want to make that a priority at the time. And in fairness, Yadi's answer would probably be, well, I had this going on family commitment-wise. I was coaching, family members in their baseball careers, and that was something that was important to me from back home. And the Cardinals might hear that answer and go, yep, pretty satisfactory to us. This is Yadier Molina. We want him to be our manager because this is where he wants to be, and this is a great opportunity for our organization. That very well may be the way that conversation goes. I would just think from the Cardinals' perspective, it would be something that would come up. But again, it's all hypothetical right now because the Cardinals have a manager. And that's what's really interesting. If Yadi's kind of happy doing what he's doing, and it's during a timeline where the Cardinals are happy with the manager that they have, then there's really nothing to be done other than for the interesting part that was said here in this clip from the morning after as the conversation continued between Martin Kilcoyne and Bengie Molina. Here's this.
And if it's not open in St. Louis, some other team says, hey, we'll take him. You think he'd do it for that opportunity?
He has so many offers right now.
As a manager or a coach?
Manager.
To manage other major league teams.
Wow. He does. So it's up to him. I know he wants to stay here in St. Louis, do his thing in St. Louis. But, man, you never know. If he doesn't get it here, I don't think he's afraid of going anywhere because it's a managerial job.
So that's the interesting tidbit there, obviously, that Bengie Molina's claim is that Yadi has already received offers to be big league manager for another organization, and he said offers plural, so multiple. Now, I don't know that would be materially relevant right now today. I don't think there are any openings left. I think all the teams that fired or got rid of their manager have a replacement at this point. So I don't think it would be in this moment there are teams going, Yadi, if you want to be our manager, let us know. We'll fire the guy we've currently got. I don't think that's even what Bengie is saying. My guess is, and again, this is not Yadi saying it, it's his brother saying it, so we have to contextualize everything. Well, Yadi said, well, no, Bengie said, but again, you have to believe that Bengie and Yadi have a close relationship, understanding that Bengie might have some better insight to what's going on and with what Yadi is thinking or doing than the rest of us would, obviously. But that is the context. But he's saying other teams at various points in time, doesn't necessarily mean right now, have made that offer to him. Now, whether that was something that was a concrete, ironclad offer, or it was just a, kind of off-the-cuff suggestion to be like, hey, man, if you wanted to be involved in this is something that we could see for you. Who knows the extent to what that necessarily looked like, right? But it is interesting that, okay, Yadi wants to manage. His choice is to manage the Cardinals if he's going to get back into it. Maybe right now is not the best time for him to get back into it by his own timeline. And if that's the case, could be a couple of years down the road yet. But when that time comes, if the Cardinals have an opening between now and then, does that suddenly expedite Yadi's timeline to where he's like, yep, I want to go for this? And do the Cardinals, are they reciprocal? Are they willing to have Yadi be their manager at that point in time? And if not, does that become the moment where there was an opening? Because again, right now, the manager of the team is the guy that was managing Yadi as a player when Yadi retired. So there hasn't been a changeover there. So respectfully, there's not really been any movement or momentum toward Yadi becoming the manager because there hasn't been an opening. If at some point there would be one, and the Cardinals would, obviously, if it's known that Yadi wants to manage the Cardinals and the Cardinals don't hire him, I think that would certainly be the point where Yadi would say, okay, I mean, they had their shot to have me, and they went in another direction. Now I'm willing to go somewhere else. If these offers are legitimate, that other teams have had interest in him previously to manage their teams, then maybe Yadi could end up vaulting right to managerial role elsewhere. But I agree with Bengie. Like, I don't think he's going to end up being a coach before managing. I think Yadi, if he wants to be a manager and there are teams out there that want him to be, then I think that could come to fruition. It's just kind of interesting when it comes to the Cardinals because there has not been an opening and there may not imminently be an opening. But if you're the guy that was the Cardinal guy for 20 years and you say, I want to be a big league manager, like, kind of an awkward spot for the Cardinals where, like, we love you, Yadi. We want you around in whatever capacity. We also have a manager right now. So there's not, that can become obviously kind of a sort of sticky situation. But for now, it's basically just a lot of talk and speculation. Very interesting, intriguing talk and speculation, but nothing that I think imminently is going to, point to a controversy or anything of the sort. But again, as with a lot of the topics we've talked about this offseason, very interesting speculation. I think Yadi would want to be a manager someday, big league manager. If it's not right now at this moment, that honestly kind of works because the Cardinals have a guy right now. And look, if they have success, I think Ollie Marmol will be the Cardinals manager for a long time to come. But it is only natural that if one of your biggest high-profile players for, the last 20 years retires and then says he wants to get into managing, the first place he's going to look, since he never played anywhere else, is going to be St. Louis. Another aspect of this, though, the guy that was in charge the whole time Yadi was there, virtually, not the entire time, but most of the time, John Mozeliak, is leaving after this offseason. So if the next guy, Chaim Bloom, who there is no relationship between Chaim Bloom and Yadier Molina, if Chaim Bloom says, well, I respect the history, I respect who he is and was with the Cardinals, and yeah, we should always have him around. We're not necessarily looking his direction for manager because he's got no experience. Like, I don't know that that's going to be how Chaim Bloom would view it, but I also don't know definitively that it's not how Chaim Bloom would view it. And I don't think anybody knows at this point. Again, this is all hypothetical because the Cardinals do not have a managerial opening. So whether Yadi gets that itch sooner than later, because again, right now it seems like he's, according to that interview, if you listen to the whole thing, is not necessarily imminently trying to jump right in, but it could be greasing the wheels for a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road to be interested in that. Do the Cardinals have an opening in that time period or do they not? And if the answer is they don't, then I wouldn't be crazy to see Yadi go manage another team if another team is offering him the opportunity to do so, and that's what he wants to do. If there is an opening, but the Cardinals look in a different direction, then I think that would be, Yadi would probably feel a certain sort of way about that if that ever came to pass. But I don't think right now it would be fair for Yadi to feel a certain sort of way about things because they haven't fired a manager. They have the manager that they want. And so maybe the opinion, look, as far as I know, Yadi and Ollie had a great relationship. So I have no reason to think that Yadi would, be saying, oh, they should have already fired him so they could hire me. I don't think that that's a thing. But obviously it's just a little bit awkward because Yadi could think that Ollie is a great manager. Yadi could also have a personal desire to be the Cardinals manager. And if he has that desire, both things can't happen at the same time, right? It doesn't have to mean there's discord between one or the other. It's just both things can't happen at the same time. So if you're Yadi and you're kind of like, all right, I'm cool with it now, but in a couple of years, when I'm done managing, my nephew or my kid or whatever it is that he's doing, I don't know exactly what all has been occupying Yadi's time, but it's family stuff, family obligations and stuff he's excited to do, which is great and very understandable and probably less, high profile and demanding than being an MLB manager in terms of the time commitment. Can't do that from Puerto Rico, right? So if it gets to the point for Yadi where he's like, yeah, I'm ready to do this at this point in my life, that's where I think it gets a lot more interesting because the Cardinals would have a realization of like, okay, we want this guy to be a part of our organization. If we think he could be a good manager, but we like our current manager, what do you do? Like, that is interesting, right? At least hypothetically and in theory. And then there's also the aspect of you have another longtime Cardinal who has expressed interest, at least it's been reported or whatever, that, and I think he said it, that Albert Pujols, he would like to be a big league manager. And I've done a video where I said between the two, I kind of think Albert would be a little bit more cut out for it. I think both could do a great job, but I also think that when you think about all of the aspects of the job, that the media, it's day-to-day, it's grinding, it's grueling, I think Albert has maybe more diplomacy in terms of his ability to kind of get through some of that stuff that may not be as enjoyable. Whereas, and also, I think both Albert and Yadi have that competitive fire and that spirit that, yeah, we'd see some ejections. We'd see some managerial ejections for both those guys. But, would that be an aspect of the job that, we would see Yadi be able to get on with? Or is it something that would be a challenge? I don't know. I think it'd be very interesting. I think both could do a nice job. But if I'm the Cardinals, I could see maybe Albert as the more immediate major league manager ready guy if neither are going to have that level of coaching experience prior to. I don't know. Maybe it's just a gut feeling. And I also don't know as far as like internal relationships. Yadi was here the whole time. Albert was not. How would that, It's very interesting because for the longest time when these two were playing, we said, oh, they're both going to make great managers someday. But now we're like a little bit closer to that potentially being a reality for either or both. And there's only ever going to be one Cardinals manager job at one time. And right now it's filled by neither Yadi or Albert, and the Cardinals like their guy, Ollie Marmol. So it's all kind of, interesting speculation. But Cardinals fans, let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Bengie Molina saying, yeah, Yadi would want to be a big league manager. He'd be willing to do it elsewhere than St. Louis, even though St. Louis is where he'd want to be. But, if the job doesn't come open, then life may go on, and that could look like Yadi managing another club. How would we feel about that, Cardinals fans? And the idea that, yeah, he's probably maybe not stepping into coaching before doing it. He thinks I could take this role right now. I could be a big league manager and maybe don't need the experience coaching to kind of wet my whistle before that. Let me know what y'all think about that, and continue to check out the channel, as well as thank you to Smith Agri Service again for partnering for today's episode of b-schaeff Daily. Continue to look for the conversation surrounding Smith Agri Service and some upcoming episodes as we gear toward winter meetings coming up next week. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. That'll do it. We'll talk to you next time on b-schaeff Daily. Peace.